national interest. Bush, Obama, Biden all consistently said that we can't depend on America's security guarantee forever. Those who hope that things will change in 3 years' time stand to be disappointed. Donald Trump is not an aberration. Don't forget, America's chosen. Not once, but twice. How many times do we have to be told? Let's get some immediate reaction from the government here to the news from Islamabad. A moment ago, I spoke to Health Secretary Westall. Especially, what's your reaction to the overnight news from Islamabad?
Well, it's obviously disappointing that we haven't yet seen a breakthrough in negotiations and an end to this war in Iran that is a sustainable one. But as ever in diplomacy, you're failing until you succeed. So while these talks may not have ended in success, that doesn't mean there isn't merit in continuing to try. And clearly, when you look at the impact of the war in Iran on this country, on other countries around the world who have no part in this war, it is in all of our interests for there to be a breakthrough and an end to this war.
As long as these talks go on, there's nothing moving straight forward. That pushes up prices for us. Eventually, it will lead to shortages. Well, what are we doing to prepare for an extended conflict?
Well, that's one of the reasons why the Foreign Secretary has been convening allies in the region and further afield to see what we can do to get goods and trade moving through the Strait of Hormuz. It's not easy, it's not straightforward. And, right across the economy, right across our public services, we're continuing to keep under close review the impact of that disruption to prices, to supply chains, and this is very much a watching brief.
Trump said this morning that he is now embarking on clearing the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean? Do we know?
I'm not sure it's ever clear. I think as we've just seen.
You mean Mr. Trump is not clear?
Over the course of the last week, President Trump has said some pretty bold, in yes, minister language, incendiary, provocative, outrageous things on social media. I think we've all come to learn that just President Trump does what he does, not just what he says. And that ultimately, the only way in which we're going to clear the situation up is to reach agreement with Iran, one that puts nuclear weapons beyond its ambitions and reach, because we've chosen very clearly, and I think it's the right decision, not to join the war in Iran. It's not a war of our choosing. We've never been in any doubt about the nature of the Iranian regime and the threat they pose to their allies in the region, to our allies in the region, the UK and our interests. So there's no doubt about that. But what we do need to see is an agreement that brings an end to this war and also an end to our future ambition.
President Trump, bold, angry, kind of outrageous. Is that the government's view?
Well, you've seen some of the things that President Trump has said in the last week. You've seen some of the criticisms he's levelled at this country. The Prime Minister has sought throughout the time they've both been in office simultaneously to influence effectively, to make sure we're leveraging the bilateral relationship. The difference of agreement with Iran has undoubtedly strained things with the Trump administration. But on so many other things, our interests as the UK and the US are intertwined. We are old and close friends, and we've got a shared outlook, as well as we've got shared security interests. So all of that work, all of that partnership continues to go on. And the point I'm making is you have to distinguish between some of the rhetoric, which people might find shocking, and then the reality. There were lots of people who went to bed early this week with President Trump threatening the end of the Iranianization, wondering what on earth would happen overnight, and woke up to a very different picture the next morning. So that's the point we're making. There's a difference between what he says and what he does. And as a government, and certainly as a I'm drawing is between the cool, calm, level-headed and serious leadership of the Prime Minister versus our domestic. I understand.
Serious point here. You're making the case that we are close to the United States. I want to come back to this question of our relationship at the moment. But is it characteristic of that close relationship for a government minister to describe the president's words as incendiary, inflammatory, outrageous, and now shocking? Is that the best way to make the relationship work, to say that?
I'm talking about the reaction that people have had.
No, you just said,
and elsewhere.
you just said the president himself, his words were incendiary, inflammatory, outrageous.
As I say, Trevor, that has been the reaction to people in this country and elsewhere to things the president.
And your own reaction.
And I'm drawing the distinction. I'm drawing the distinction between what President Trump says and how he says it, and then what he does, and the contrast with the cool, calm, level-headed leadership the Prime Minister has shown in keeping us out.
I'm not trying to do something odd here or any gotcha. I'm just very interested because it's very rare for a minister to share his or her own personal reaction. And what I am guessing is that the words you've used describe your own personal reaction to President Trump's threat to destroy civilization. Am I understanding that properly?
Well, Trevor, I don't think it's controversial to say that on social media, Iranian civilization is really that let's use this minister language. Really quite.
I'm right. I'm right. Anyway, I'd rather just say, I'd rather use West Stripping language.
The point I'm making is, and because this is part of the world in which the UK.
Hello, like and subscribe.
You do to distinguish between what President Trump says and how he says it, and then what he does. Because so much of the political conversation, and I was being asked earlier this week about what the US administration was saying in earlier interviews, and what would the UK government reaction be if President Trump were to, and this is the point, isn't it? You're trying to distinguish between what he says, how he says it, which people may find outrageous or may find out incendiary, and then what he does. And your whole approach has been about making sure two things. Firstly, the UK doesn't get dragged into and secondly, protect our country as best we can.
So your view is, as they say in the United States, take the president seriously, but don't take them
literally. I think that's correct.
Is it a matter of concern to you that we, the United Kingdom, are playing no part in these talks that took place in Islamabad and will carry on elsewhere?
Well, obviously, we talk regularly to the US administration. The Prime Minister spoke to President Trump only the other day. We obviously have a strong historic bilateral relationship with Pakistan.
But we're not in the room, are we?
No, well, these are talks between the US and Iran convened.
This week, I wonder if one of the reasons that we're not in the room is that this episode has revealed something to the rest of the world and also to us about our place. This week, the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff couldn't confirm to Parliament that Britain could deploy a heavy battle group, that's 600 to 1,000 military personnel with tanks and so forth in Europe. Is the reason that nobody invites us to talk because they know actually we can't really do anything? We couldn't even get a battleship out to the Gulf.
I think that's a gross mischaracterisation, both of the UK's diplomatic standing.
We haven't got about the I'm quoting the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, Trevor, I think there are two things you're saying. One is about the UK's diplomatic influence, and the other is about the strength of our armed forces, and I'll take those in turn. The UK is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We are a key member of NATO. Even outside of the European Union, we are the cornerstone of European defence and security, particularly with France and also with Italy, and increasingly working with Germany, who've changed their defence posture. We have strong relationships with France. Conservatives to strengthen our military seriously raised.
This is you now.
Yeah, and you know what? Since we've been in less than 2 years, we've increased defence spending to record levels. Of course, it takes time to rebuild capability that is lost. That is why it's both fair and appropriate to criticise our predecessors for being so short-sighted.
We're going to speak things up and build up our armed forces again.
We've got the defence investment plan coming. The Chancellor has increased
The
defence investment.
one that was supposed to arrive, 6 months ago?
Well, we could do it the Tory way and just say, oh, here's a vague ambition and promise. Yeah, and the way we do action, not words. We've increased defence spending. The defence investment plan is coming. It will be published when it is ready, when it is robust, and it is a plan that can be delivered. That is
When is that going to be, by the way?
between the pie in the sky promises we saw
When are you going to deliver it?
investment or saying by the
When are you going to deliver the defence investment strategy?
shortly. I understand it is being finalised.
Shortly, 6 months ago was, what, is it weeks? Months? What's the
Plan that's the defence sector in the country.
All right. Is that deal dead?
No, look, the United States is going through its own process at the moment, and it is fair to say there has been a shift in position in Washington. We've been clear throughout that the objective is to make sure we secure the Chagos Islands for a long-term in British and American interest. I think there are lots of people in the US administration who understand what we're trying to achieve, who support that objective. We're working with the Americans to try and resolve that because we've been clear that we wouldn't act without the Americans because this also concerns their interests as well.
Lots of people, but not the president. Are you a bit cross that Mr. Farage appears to have had more influence on this matter than the Prime Minister?
Well, I think it is fair to say we've seen two things. We've seen extraordinary hypocrisy on the part of the Conservatives, who were also negotiating the Chagos deal. They understood when they were in government the importance of this and quickly changed their tune on the other side. And as for Mr. Farage, the extent to which that man, that classic patriot, is prepared to fly to Washington on a regular basis to flag off his own country to American audiences, I think is utterly shameful, and one should take his claims to be a patriot with a pinch of salt.
Now, our relationship with America is, as you've already been saying this morning, important. Is the United States still our closest ally?
Yes.
Is it still our indispensable ally?
Yes.
So, whatever
No,
the
you
United States
subscribe anyway.
does, and whatever sound we hear from
Eat that like mutton.
Mr. Trump, we are still essentially, we may speak truth to power and all of that, but we are still going to be involved
Only
in
bum.
this at the level
Ew.
that we have been.
Yeah, look, the relationship with the United States is broad, it's deep, it's historic, and it has weathered differences of opinion over many decades, many presidents, and many prime ministers. This is no different. In fact, right now, there is clearly a difference with President Trump on Iran. There is clearly a difference with President Trump over Greenland. There's clearly a difference with President Trump over Chagos. And regardless of those disagreements, every single day, there are diplomats, military personnel, business leaders working lockstep with our friends in the United States of America. This relationship is bigger than any president or prime minister. And despite those disagreements and what you read on social media, the prime minister and the president are picking up the phone.
I don't read social media, but isn't it the truth here that actually, you can dress it up whichever way you like, but this is essentially one of dependency. We can't make our currency without American support. Nuclear stuff can't go to war without picking up missiles in America. Troops can't fight in European theatre without American intelligence and insight. And the surrender, essentially, of Chagos base, where the Americans essentially have a veto, says that essentially we can have all of this chat about partners and allies and the rest of it, but we are really dependent. We are almost a neutrality.
We also have unique capabilities that the Americans rely on as well, and that Chagos is an example. and there are capabilities that we have that the Americans respect. So look, I wouldn't overstate all of this. It's not. I wouldn't pretend it's been an easy few weeks and months with some of these disagreements. We don't like disagreeing with our friends, but sometimes it's necessary. And I think the Prime Minister deserves credit for it, because I think there are lots of people who've been in his shoes as Prime Minister who haven't shown the same grit and guts that the Prime Minister showed.
Let me remind you that you are the Health Secretary. 2 years ago on this programme, you laid into Tories and their incompetence. You said you'd be able to get round the table as doctors, and you start talks, I'm quoting you here, start talks urgently to end the chaos. And you said, I am beyond furious that this, bracket strikes, still happening. Are you furious with yourself?
No, I'm furious with the BMA. I mean, we take the difference between us and the Conservatives. I'm glad you drew through the comparison. They refused to negotiate with BMA. They didn't get them around the table. In fact, they froze them out for a long time. I did the opposite. I called them on day one, had them in week one. We agreed the deal. They got 28.9% pay rise. They have then, for reasons I think are absurd, they've chosen to go out and strike again. And they've just rejected a deal that would have put another 4.9% on the table, that would have given thousands of new training opportunities, that would have cancelled their exam fees, and they've rejected it. And I just say to you,
describe their behaviour.
Unreasonable, because look, the fact is, Trevor, I'm not saying that they haven't got some fair criticisms here of how they were treated by our predecessors.
Right.
And I'm not pretending to have solved all of those issues within 2 years. I'm asking the BMA not to pretend we could have done.
Well, Stephen, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the Times journalist, Stephen Sackett, columnist and broadcaster Sonia Soda, and former Downing Street Director of Communications, Guto Harry. Sonia, what do you make of what happened overnight in Islamabad?
I think it's classic Donald Trump to talk up this grand idea of a ceasefire, and then when you look at the reality of it, we've seen it before, we've seen it with Russia and Ukraine, we've seen it with Israel and Gaza. When you look at the reality, actually the two sides, and one of them in this case is actually the US, they are miles apart. It's really worrying. With a lot of American interventions, it takes some time for things to work through and see that actually the intervention may have left the world in a worse place. I think we've realised that very quickly with America's intervention in Iran, that actually what Donald Trump's actions have left the West in a weaker place in relation to Iran, which, let's not forget, is an autocratic, despotic regime that murders its young people. So, no sympathy for Iran over here, but I think they may now be in a stronger position as a result of America's actions, and that's really worrying.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. The problem is he stumbled into this totally out of his depth, thinking that all he needs to do is provide a narrative, and he defines what happens in the world for the next 24 hours, and then he changes the narrative. This has clashed with reality, and I think that's why government ministers are now refreshingly, speaking about him quite frankly, because he's been exposed. He is full of bull, if you like, and he talks a big game, but the reality has always lagged behind. And on this occasion, the reality is, in total at odds with what he's dreamt of.
Steve, but is there, I mean, I don't want to be the MAGA representative, but nobody's try it. Steve, you can do it. But is there something you said, or the fact that whatever he's done, he's managed to get in the room with the Iranians for the first time in what now, more than 40 years?
Yeah, but why is that an achievement that he would crow about? What he's done, if you think of this from Tehran's perspective, is he sent his vice president, J.D. Vance, to spend 15 hours in these talks, which are unprecedented, which is a sign to the Iranians, you know what? We've got the Americans where we want them. And it's an illusion of leverage that I think the Trump administration is trying to exercise here. They somehow think that this might they can bring to bear will ultimately force the Iranians to make the concessions the Americans. It's just not happening. I don't know if they go back to war, if they go back to escalation. I don't know how they think that goes to open up the Straits of Hormuz. And what we've seen with the the resilience of a regime which, as Sonia says, there's no reason to feel sympathy for, but a regime which is well practiced in withstanding enormous pressure. They've done it before, admittedly not in this sense of military loss and damage, but they can still, in my opinion, withstand escalation. So where did the Americans go? And of course, there are two Donald Trumps. There's the Donald Trump that wants to bully Iran, but there's also the Donald Trump that is so very scared of global economic meltdown. And the Iranians know that too.
This presents something of a challenge for our own government, which has sat very carefully on a fence and has been really quite careful for a long time. But what did you make of the Health Secretary's remarks, Sonia?
Well, I think West Jason has definitely had his Weetabix this morning, hasn't he? Yeah, that was very, very strong words that he said about Donald Trump's remarks about wanting to end Iranian civilization. And in some ways, I mean, you look at those words, what else can you say about them? Of course they were outrageous, but it's interesting that a government minister has chosen to use those words. I don't think it's what Keir Starmer would have said, because as you say, Keir Starmer has tried to walk a very careful line where he's maintaining the diplomatic alliance with the US, but also pushing back where he needs to. But I suspect that he won't mind having an outrider within the government saying that, because actually when you think about how the government faces to its voters domestically, Donald Trump is incredibly unpopular, and it's actually a big issue for a party like Reform, led by Nigel Farage. And I think there's probably a calculation been made in government somewhere that we should be saying some quite strong things about Donald Trump when local elections less than 4 weeks away.
Don't you think there's a sort of watershed moment last week when Starmer made a decision? He made a decision to come out and say he was fed up. You know, he got the big frown on. He said he was cross. He was fed up with, interestingly, Trump and Putin. And he was putting them in the same bucket. He said both of them are doing things, taking actions which are putting up bills, hitting energy prices for our people, and I'm essentially not having it anymore. And that is a signal to people like West Street, they can go out.
And that's a theme that needs to be spelled out even more, that the people who are going to suffer now are Americans who are very sensitive to the price of gasoline in their cars, and they voted in Donald Trump despite all the horrors that they were conscious of that, you know, would come with him, because they thought he can improve their cost of living. And I think Western media should point out just how contradictory this is, and this goes to the heart of the danger for Donald Trump himself. Though he doesn't, they voted him to improve the cost of living and to make it work.
Well, look, we as a country are already on Mr. Trump's naughty step because we didn't say yes to the use of bases. And he is notoriously attentive to what people say about him in all parts of the world. I suspect it will be noticed. Is it worth, as Stephen said, maybe playing to the gallery here, knowing that will produce reaction in the White House?
I think that the White House, and I suspect this is again the calculation in government, the White House and Donald Trump, and it's just now so unpredictable, his activity on social media, that 1 minute he may be saying something terrible about the UK, the next minute he'll be very excited about the King coming to visit. So I think the government has played it wisely so far, in the sense that I think they really needed to try and maintain this a good-ish relationship with Donald Trump as long as they could. But I just think he's so unpredictable. He'll take offense at something else, even if government ministers aren't this frank. Maybe it is online, I don't know, but I sort of feel like the time has come to be a bit honest. And we've seen Mark Carney do that, for example, from Canada.
I was just going to mention Mark Carney, something really interesting from the Canadian. Mark Carney stands up in the last 48 hours and says, you know what, given what Trump is doing, what the US is doing, particularly to NATO, we are going to fundamentally change our military procurement strategy. We're no longer going to buy American weapons. When you've got an important member of NATO sending that sort of signal, it's not just about Britain, it's about all of the NATO membership looking at the United States and thinking we have to fundamentally rethink this relationship.
Is this the gradual crumbling of special relationship or the split?
I think that's succeeded and